Hello, seniors. I was gonna check in with you after the 10th. It is after the 10th. It's a week after the 10th. So if you were going to revise your essays, they were due on the 10th, and I wanted to give you 2 weeks to do that because I also knew that you were transitioning from, the way things were into this new way of doing school for your primary school, and then also I'm sure you're doing a lot of college stuff too. So I wanted to give you a little bit of time, and you had an option to do it or not do it. We are now going to move on to our next assignment. There's 2 more assignments before we're done. I'm going to give them both to you in this, but they'll have different due dates, and I will post the details in writing below this video, and then also you'll have it in an email, in the body of an email that you will get from probably me, actually. I think I have all your emails now. Okay, so what I'd like to do is I want to go over some poetry, some elements of poetry, but I'd like us to write about a single poem that we talked about before we left. And I wanted to do a couple more things with this poem we didn't get to. So that's what I want to focus on now. And this poem is Ars Poetica by Jose Olivares. Let me just make sure I pronounce his name correctly. Are you Olivares? Which you read. Some of you, everybody seemed to really like it, but some of you got it and you're like, oh yeah, I totally get this poem. And other people were like, wait, what? And both reactions are totally fine. Poetry, sometimes for some people a poem blossoms immediately, and sometimes it's more like a room or a door you have to unlock. Either one is an appropriate and totally normal response. If it's a door you have to unlock, you'll have to work a little harder to get inside of it. But even if it blossoms immediately for you, you'll have to work hard to explain why it blossomed. And sometimes that is a little bit harder than trying to figure out something you didn't get at first. Sometimes it's harder to translate what we think we already know into words than something we're trying to understand. So the 2 assignments are going to be, you're going to write your own version of this poem. Obviously, Jose Olivares is talking about migration and his family's journey on in a both metaphorical and literal way. Not all of us have that story, so you will be talking about something that is central to your understanding of the world, your experience of the world, and your identity. Those are the 3 things I want you to focus on: understanding of the world, experience of the world, identity. So you'll choose something, and you will then employ the poetry devices and the elements of poetry we're going to learn about in this video, which you probably already know about. It'll be a review in that poem. I know that we're not all poets. I'm asking you to do this because I want you to stretch yourself and push yourself. It's a great opportunity for those of us who are poets. It'll be fun. But why not? Writing a poem is an excellent academic and mental activity. After you write this poem, I would like you to write an essay either on your own poem or on Jose Olivares' poem. And that assignment will be below too, and I'll explain it a little bit more. First, however, I would like to go over some elements of poetry. I'm going to timestamp this video so that when you go through the video, you can just click to review these pieces. We're going to go over theme, tone, language, word choice, diction. Those are really all the same words for the same thing. Figurative language, image/imagery, and symbolism. So let's begin. All right, so theme. Theme would be the overall message, point, the largest thing in the poem. So I'm thinking of some poems we've looked at. You all did a great job with your paragraphs about the palace, Kava Akbar's poem. Your job there was to think about what the theme might be, and a lot of you said the theme of this was too many opportunities. How too many options is limiting. Or you said it was materialism, American materialism. You had some great insights into theme. So theme is like this big idea that the whole poem is chasing after, explaining, trying to show or reveal, right? It's not necessarily, it is a message, but it's not like the moral. It's not the same thing as like a fable that has a moral that's trying to teach you a lesson. It can be that, but it doesn't have to be that. So that's theme. Tone is the writer of the piece, their attitude towards that theme. So tone is the writer's attitude toward the content in the poem. I should have said mood. Mood kind of goes along with tone. Tone is what the writer thinks about the content. Mood is how you, the reader, feel as you're reading the piece. So those two things go hand in hand, but they are different things, and that's important to know. Tone is similar to tone of voice, but in writing, you don't have the benefit of inflection. So you don't have the benefit of knowing that someone is being sarcastic when they say good morning. Like, obviously, that's not very welcoming or kind, right? Or if somebody says, how are you? And someone says, I'm great. That means they're great. If someone says, I'm great, that means they're maybe the opposite of great, right? Those words on the page would be the same. It's the tone of voice that carries the meaning. We don't have the benefit of inflection on the page. And so we do that through how we sort of arrange our words, how we use punctuation. There's a lot of tools we have to establish tone. Repetition can establish tone. Also, just like the overall way the piece fits together sometimes reveals tone. And we'll touch back on that as we talk about more things that go into tone. So the next thing I want to talk about is language choice, word choice, or diction. Diction means the words you choose, right? Diction has a lot to do with tone. Choosing specific words, especially in the small space of a poem, can really reveal the tone and intent of the author. You know, I can't think of a concrete example, but word choice really kind of shapes tone, and tone really helps reveal the thesis. Next, we've got figurative language, which you all are familiar with. That's metaphor, simile, allusion. What else is there? I can't think of another one, but there are many. Oh, personification. Metaphor is a comparison not using like or as. Simile is a comparison using like or as. Personification is when an inanimate object, something that is non-living, takes on personal characteristics of a human. So the computer was sad, or the book was lonely. And allusion is when you make a reference to something outside of the piece. The writer makes a reference to something outside of the piece that is known, generally speaking, in the world. It's not really an allusion if you're referencing something that nobody knows. It can't be like an inside joke. It's a reference to something that other people know outside of the world of the poem or the piece itself. So you can have historical allusions, biblical allusions, so on and so forth. What did I say was after this? Oh, image, imagery, and symbolism. Okay, so an image in a poem is exactly what it sounds like. In the same way that diction and tone helps give us the meaning of the theme, and it corresponds with like the tone of voice we use in speaking, image is just like a photograph, but it's in words. So if you open a poem with an image of a bird with a broken wing on the pavement on a rainy day, we can probably deduct as your readers that your poem is going to be definitely examining sadness, even if it ends on a hopeful note. There's definitely sadness in the poem, right? Because that image evokes so much, pity or sadness or fear, maybe even in your reader, right? So image is usually a visual description of something, and it is used often to support tone. Diction plays into image because the words you use to describe the image are very important to how the reader receives the image. When you use an image as a symbol, it becomes symbolism. Symbolism is one thing standing in for another. So maybe that bird with the broken wing was standing in for your heart because you have a broken heart, right? So image very easily and quickly can become, especially extended images, and imagery can be a huge component of symbolism. So all of these things are different and distinct, and yet they all work together to create the magic of a poem. All right. Having said that, let us move on to, we're going to read a different Ars Poetica by MacLeish, Archibald MacLeish. What a name. I will read it out loud to you, and then we'll kind of use it as a key to look once again at the Ars Poetica poem that you have already read by Jose Olivares. I'm sorry, I'm messing that up. Ars Poetica by Archibald MacLeish. A poem should be palpable and mute as a globed fruit, dumb as old medallions to the thumb, silent as the sleeve-worn stone of casement ledges where the moss has grown. A poem should be wordless as the flight of birds. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs, leaving as the moon releases, twig by twig, the night entangled trees, leaving as the moon behind the winter leaves, memory by memory, the mind. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs. A poem should be equal to not true, for all the history of grief, an empty doorway and a maple leaf, for love, the leaning grasses and two lights above the sea. A poem should not mean, but be. All right, this is a rhymier poem than I usually like, but I think his imagery and symbolism is beautiful. And where we see sort of how we can look at poems, this is, in Ars Poetica is sort of the definition of poetry in a way. Often writers write their own Ars Poetica, as Jose Olivares did, to show why or how they write poems. You know, they're kind of their mission statement in a way. In this case, Archibald MacLeish is sort of writing a general Ars Poetica that is instructing us how to write a poem or what a poem should be. And because it's talking about what a poem should be, this can be instructive to both writers and readers of poetry. So one thing that really interests me in this poem is that he says a poem should be wordless, as the flight of birds. And that's fascinating to me because obviously he used words to say a poem should be wordless. What? But also, as the flight of birds, you know, that image, of course, is made of words, but at the same time, there's sort of a magic that happens where we've all seen a flight of birds, we can picture it. And there's kind of, sometimes there's nothing more beautiful than murmurations, they're called, like configurations of huge flocks of birds in the sky when they kind of flip and careen and they look like one giant bird moving together. That is a kind of, seems like a kind of magic trick that also I feel is something that poetry does. And so he says it should be wordless, but then he gives us this image which is full of movement and it's very dynamic. And it's not soundless, right? In fact, perhaps a flight of birds is wordless, but they're communicating through their cause, right? And so I just think that that's interesting. I think he's creating these parameters that he's breaking as he's creating them, as poems often do. Overall, his message is a poem should show something rather than tell it, right? And I find the other Ars Poetica that we're looking at really interesting because of the way that language is used to show a story rather than tell a story. I think is fascinating. I'm trying to think of what points I wanted to point out to you. He has this kind of trick he starts with by starting with a word, migration, Jose Olivares, that is, we're moving on to him, and then looking at the dictionary definition, right? And then he gives us a plot twist. Migration never ends, right? And then he starts to go into his literal background, and then he brings in, so where his parents are from, and where they moved to, and what year, but then he moves in to some more figurative elements. At one point, he says, I don't know what, this is a small poem. I don't know why I'm having trouble finding things in it. Oh, plot twist, migration never ends. So he's got the literal and the figurative together in this poem. I think what I'd like you to do, instead of me deciphering the poem for you, I would like you to, in an essay, choose what you think his theme is and use one of those elements we just talked about to show how he shows that. So how does his diction, his word choice, his use of language would be a great one to choose because he's looking at words very closely, defining them, and then giving different definitions for them. The literal definition and then giving you a more figurative access to those words. So looking at diction, word choice, language, and how it reveals the theme would be a great option for an essay. Looking at tone would be a great option as well. You've got lots of options. Like I said, I'm going to timestamp this video so you can go through and review each part. Also, there's many amazing resources online for all of these pieces and elements of poetry. So your job is to, like I already said, you're going to write an essay defining what the theme is and telling me what poetic element reveals that theme. And I'm going to look at the calendar and tell you when I think this needs to be due. To wrap up our program in the parameters of what the program would have been before. We've got about 2 weeks left of it, I guess. 3. And then I also want you, and you can do this in different orders. You can do the poem for, well, never mind. I'm going to put deadlines below. I also want you to write your own version of this. So like I said at the beginning, how you understand the world. Oh man, I have to go back and remember what 3 things I said, but I want you to focus on something that is part of your identity to write about. You can write about it in this form, the way that Jose did in a prose poem, or you can write about it in a different form of poetry. But if you're not a poem-y person, this is a prose poem. Prose poems are poems. And so if you want to be creative, but still write in a block of paragraph-like block, that's totally fine. If you have questions, please email me. If you email me, any communication between you and I, Miss Tracy also has to be part of that communication. So make sure you are emailing both of us at the same time. You'll notice she's on any email I send to you. Okay, so I'll put all of these assignments in writing. I'll actually probably put them in a Google Doc and attach the Google Doc, and I will put your due dates below as well. I miss you guys. I hope you're doing well. I will talk to you soon.